Hi, and welcome to this presentation on citing and referencing with the 7th edition of the APA style. Referencing is the action of telling your reader where you got your information from. In APA, you will need to indicate the name of the author and the year of publication every time you put a reference. Then, that information will need to correspond to your reference list, where you will describe the source with more details, starting always with the name of the author and the year of publication. You only need to enter a reference once in your reference list, and your reference list will need to be put in alphabetical order. Furthermore, in the APA style, you might have also noticed that you will need to put an indent after the first line in your reference list. Before going into details of how you reference, why do you need to reference? First, you need to acknowledge the work of other authors, to tell your reader where you got your information and to explain the logic of your arguments. You need to reference to avoid being accused of plagiarism, so that people reading your work can distinguish between an idea you read and an idea that is yours. You need to reference to allow your reader to refer back to your sources so that people reading your work will be able to look at the other documents and find all the sources you've used. And finally, you need to reference to stand on the shoulders of giants. This quote by Isaac Newton means to give more strength to your arguments by providing the source behind your reasoning. Referencing in the APA style is explained in this book, which you can find in the library under the shelf mark JJE. There are many distinctive styles of referencing, one of them being Cite Harvard, which is also used as a type stock. If you're more familiar with the Cite Harvard style, this is a list of all the differences between referencing in Cite Harvard and referencing in the APA style. In the APA, you can write et al. Starting from 3 authors. You do not need to write the place of publication for books. You need to put ND instead of just no date if no date of publication is available. You will not need to put before the URL of the website the expression available from. You will not need to indicate the mentioned DOI before adding a DOI link. You will need to display an ellipsis in the reference list if the document has more than 20 authors. You will need to add a dot after the year of publication in the reference list. And finally, all the references in the reference list will need an indent after the first line. The version of APA we're going to see is the 7th edition. If you're more familiar with the 6th edition, here are the list of differences between APA 6 and 7th. In APA 7th, you do not need to put the place of publication for books. You need to specify the day and month in the page was last updated for a website. You do not need to indicate retrieve from before putting the URL of a website. You will not need to specify the type of ebooks you're referencing. You do not need to indicate in the mention DOI before DOI links. You can display up to 20 authors before adding an ellipsis instead of 6 previously. You can write et al. Starting from 3 authors from the first time they are mentioned. And finally, the APA 7th edition details how to reference knowledge transmitted through oral tradition. Now, let us look at how to write an in-text citation in the APA style. To write an in-text citation for a source with one author, you will need to indicate the name of the author and the year of publication every time you reference something. You do not need to introduce the name of the author and the year of publication, and you can put both between brackets separated by a comma. If you do not have the name of the author, but instead it's an organization, you will need to use the organization name. If you've used the name of the author within the sentence, then you do not need to put it into brackets, and you only need to put the year of publication between brackets. If you've put the year of publication inside the sentence, but not the name of the author, then you will need to put the name of the author between brackets. And if you've put both the name of the author and the year of publication within your sentence, then you don't need to put anything between brackets. Please remember that in-text citation counts as part of your word count. If your citation has been written by up to 2 authors, then you will need to indicate all those names in your document. In parentheses, you need to use the ampersand symbol for up to 2 authors, but outside of parentheses, you will use and. For more than 2 authors, you can just use et al. So you'll indicate the name of the first author and mention et al, but not the other authors. If you need to cite several works, you'll need to place the citation in alphabetical order and separate it by a semicolon. If you do not know the year of publication, you can write ND for no date instead. For documents that have been accepted for publication but were unpublished at the time, you need to use in press. However, not having a date of publication means the document will lack some essential information to put it in context. If you're not able to find the date of publication, it might be better to find an alternative source where the date of publication is indicated. But if no alternatives are available and the reference is essential in your document, then you can put ND and reference the source. However, never assume the date of publication of a document. The document will need the date of publication to be clearly indicated on it. If it's not indicated, then use the mention ND. If you do not know the author of the publication, you can instead write the title of the publication, and if the title of the publication is in italic, keep the italic, and in the reference list, the title of the work moves then to the author's position. If you cite a website with no specific web page, no reference list entry is needed. Before in text citation, you just put the main address of the website in parentheses. The same applies for general mentions of journals. If you need to quote for short quotation, fewer than 40 words, you need to enclose them in double quotation marks. For example, put the name of the author between parentheses, the year of publication, and the page where the quotation comes from. And then add afterwards the quote between quotation marks. If you have a longer quotation, you need to separate it in the block from the text with an indent of 0.50 from the left margin. If you do not need to use quotation marks, notice that you will still need to introduce the quote the same way you would with quotation marks, but instead put an indent and then put the quote slightly aside from the rest of the text. If you cite with a quote, or to indicate where an idea is expressed, you will need to localize it with what is available, a page number or paragraph number, section, table, figures, footnotes, chapters, timestamps for videos or audiobooks, slide number for PowerPoint presentations. This means that whenever you have a document where you do not have a page number, you do not need to invent a page number. You only need to use what is available for you to indicate where the quote comes from. If you do not have pagination details, for instance with an ebook, you can use the information you need to have the localization, the percentage, the chapter, or the paragraph. If several citations can be mixed up because you're using two citations with the same name and the same year of publication, then you need to distinguish them by allocating lowercase letters next to the year of publication, the order in which they appear in your reference list. Now, if you have a secondary reference, for instance a document that is cited in another document, then you need to use the phrase as cited in and give the page number. That is true, for instance, for a document referencing Freud but written by Melanie Klein. If you need to use the quote by Freud, you need to indicate where you got it from and mention Melanie Klein's book. To reference personal communications, which are documents readers cannot have access to, you will need to put the initials and surname of the communicator with an exact as possible date. To cite Sigmund Freud, you will need to add the date of publication of the edition you're using to the original year of publication of the text. For instance, if the text comes from the standard edition, you will need to put between brackets Freud as the name of the author, then a comma, then the date of publication of the original document, separated by /, and then the date of publication of the document as it was published, and finally, a page number.